Just as a player, as a member of this brotherhood, when you saw that last night, Louis Riddick, what was the first thought that went through your mind?
Well, there was a bunch of four-letter words that were coming out of my mouth watching this going, you got to be kidding me what I just saw. Look, I played in an era, I'm a little bit older than the guys here. I played in an era with some of the most vicious players in the NFL, okay? I grew up idolizing Jack Tatum. I remember when Jack Tatum, paralyzed Darryl Stingley. I remember what that hit looks like. I idolized Ronnie Lott. So the viciousness of the game, what happens within the white lines, in the context of the game, I'm all for. I make no apologies for the way the game used to be played. I understand why it's played the way it's played now in the interest of safety. So I get all that. Do not tell me that this you can just wrap into the context of, well, it's just part of the game. Players fight all the time, because that's BS and you know it. And if you're a former player and you try to say that, you know you're lying. This is not in the normal context of the game. What Myles did last night, and look, I understand him and Mason were going at it down there on the bottom of that pile at first, and Mason was pulling at his helmet. We've all seen those kind of fights happen. When a helmet comes off, now all of a sudden understand, you're part of a big fraternity. You're not trying to assault somebody with a helmet. Look at how he swings the helmet. If the crown of that helmet had come down on the top of Mason Rudolph's head, I promise you, we'd be having a different discussion. Because we'd be watching maybe on national TV someone's head split wide open and then bleeding and maybe unconscious, and who knows, maybe something even more unthinkable. So then what would you say? Well, it's just part of the normal course of the game and people get angry? Don't be stupid about this. What Myles did is inexplicable. He does need to sit the rest of the year, and if they take a bunch of his money and make him sit next year, whatever. I don't really care, because you can't do that. If it happens in the course of a game and the game is vicious and people get knocked out, I get all that. Not like this.
Well, and that's where you go. You mentioned during the course of a play versus post-play. And what's unbelievable about this to me is seeing it. Like, the Browns were winning the game. Myles Garrett is playing pretty well. Now, I was on the sideline playing defense when Albert Hainsworth stepped on Andre Gerard's face. He comes running off. He's got blood pouring all over the place. He's got a towel, 30 stitches. He did that out of frustration because he was getting worn out. Like, it was a bad day at the office for him, so he lashes out late. Like, you look at the Browns are winning. It's 21-7. And so as you watch this here and you see it, it doesn't necessarily look all that egregious, but it's a 330-pound man stomping on another man's face, post-play, laying there. Like, I understand Myles Garrett gets into it. He rips the helmet off. But at that point in time, Mason Rudolph's coming at you. That's where it's got to stop. You toss the helmet down. If you want to get in his face and jaw a little bit, then you might see a fine. Maybe you're getting a little flag. But it's not a situation where someone could be hurt. He got 5 games for that. I think probably the NFL, it's a much different climate 15 years later. You're looking at him. The rest of the season's only 6 games. Any playoffs that could potentially be out there, maybe. But the rest of the season probably does sound about right, given where we're at.
But just embarrassed. You said, how did you feel when you watched it? I just couldn't believe it. It went to another level that it's embarrassing to watch as a former player, but at the same time, like you guys know, it's just when the helmets come off, it's like, all right, it's
what is that? You were telling me this before. Generally speaking, if you're on the field and the helmet comes off, what is the first thought you have?
Especially in joint practices, stuff like that. There's fights all the time, and it's a scuffle, it's a push, it's a face mask grab, whatever it is. Okay, people separate it, and it's usually not the quarterbacks, to be honest, but once your helmet comes off, especially Mason Rudolph, dude, I mean, there's not much else you're going to do right there that's a good decision.
Let me get a thought from you, Jonathan Vilma.
There's nothing to defend there. I'm watching Myles Garrett and playing defense. Lou played defense. Bobby played defense. There's nothing that I can say to defend Myles Garrett. I can't even say, well, in practice that happens. That never happens. And you know automatically there's a line to cut off when as soon as the helmets come off, you relax because you're talking about someone's son. You're talking about if he's a father. You're talking about if he's a husband. I mean, we're talking about the livelihood of this player, Mason Rudolph, not just for football, but outside of football as well. You can't do that.
Yeah, this goes, and I'm told Shefty has something else for us. Go ahead, Shefty, jump in here.
Well, one other thing I want to add here. Myles Garrett is a former #1 overall pick. He's got 10 sacks this season, Greeny. And in the course of a matter of moments last night, he delivered an act that will define him for the rest of his NFL career. In one moment, he gave fans a memory that people will always think of him by. When we say Albert Hainsworth, we think of foot stomping. And from now on, no matter what he does for the rest of his career, people will always remember Myles Garrett as the guy that could have killed a football player on a football field by taking his helmet and swinging it like a weapon, like a jackhammer, like a sledgehammer. And that is something that he's going to have to overcome over years. And if he leads the Browns to Super Bowl titles, it won't erase this night. It will always be a part of his resume from this moment on going forward, and the NFL will tack onto it today by handing down what we imagine to be the stiffest suspension in NFL history.
In NFL history. I think that's exactly right, Shefty. Thank you. Let me come over here quickly to you, Bobby, because you mentioned you were involved in the game when we just saw it there with Hainsworth and Gerard. And again, this feels almost unprecedented. As a player, you're not a lawyer. I'm not asking you a legal question. I'm asking you an emotional player question. Do you want to see something more than football discipline done here? I'm reading a lot of stuff on Twitter about getting the police involved, assault, etc. As a player, do you want to see something like that happen?
I hate to play results, but I think in this case you play results with a situation. Mason Rudolph, I don't think that he's going to push this because nothing else happened. And so he was sitting there and he can stand tall in the press conference. And sometimes the fact that you can and understanding that you could go further and you don't is probably all that needs to be done. The fact that, hey, you could do this. This is an act outside of the game. I'm going to be the bigger man in this. I'm not going to get legal, and we're not going to drag it down that road and drag it out for everybody else.
It's easy to sit here without that happening. Would any of you be inclined to press charges against someone who did something like this?
No, and I think I understand, Bobby, and I agree with your point. I think Myles Garrett is lucky. He is very lucky. Because I'll tell you what, Mason Rudolph just got knocked out of a game recently. So he has a history of concussion. He has a history of head trauma. If something – now, look, if he got knocked out and say he went unconscious with that hit, which is totally reasonable, and people are going to keep saying, but he didn't get knocked out. That isn't the point. The point is he got hit on the top of the head with a helmet. We know how heavy helmets are. We know how big and how strong Myles Garrett is. I don't think he'll go down that road. If it was me, I probably wouldn't go down that road, but I'll tell you this. If something had happened to me, you can best believe I'm going to the full extent of the law. If I got knocked out or something like that or it compromised my career, which it is totally reasonable to say you risk compromising that man's career. And that's just, look, I don't really know how else, you can't defend you just can't, Greeny. You can't. You can't do that. And again, we played the game. Jonathan, look, you played on some of the greatest defenses of some of the greatest players in the history of the game in college football. And you guys were vicious. I'm all for it. Not that.
Not that.
100% agree.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports, highlights, and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.